first I'm going to go ahead and walk you through the different types of objective markers that you can use for a game of Warhammer, Age of Sigmar, or 40K. So first on the left-hand side of the screen, this is going to be one of the objective markers that can be purchased from Games Workshop through one of their yearly objective packs. In the center of the screen, that is going to be a 40K objective marker that you can get also from one of their yearly scenario packs. And then on the right-hand side of the screen, this is going to represent an objective marker that you can just simply purchase off the internet. So first I'm going to go through the official specifications for an objective control marker. The first one is that the marker itself is going to be 40 millimeters. And what that means, that's the diameter of the control marker. And this might be kind of hard to see, so I'll zoom in on the tape measure. So if you can see, I have 4 centimeters, which is equivalent to 40 millimeters. And when I look at this objective control marker, it is exactly 40 millimeters. So that's going to be the one for 40K, which I'm holding in my hand. And now we're going to look at the same thing for Age of Sigmar. I'm going to go ahead and just pop this onto the screen. And notice that the center of the marker is going to be 4 centimeters as well, which is also 40 millimeters. But you're going to notice on this one that it has a lot more material on this control marker, and it's going to extend radially outward from the center. So basically, whether you're playing 40K or Age of Sigmar, there's going to be a 3-inch sort of control zone around the control marker itself. So think of the center as being 40 millimeters itself, and then the control marker is going to extend 3 inches in each direction radially around this control marker. So kind of when we're taking a look at this, I'm just going to take the 40K one and pop it in the middle of the Age of Sigmar one, and notice it fits directly into the center of the screen. And then there's going to be a 3-inch sort of radial control around that objective marker. Basically what that means is that you just simply have to have one of your models within this radial control area. And I'm just going to go ahead and focus on this for a while. So as an example, if I have some of these wonderful Seraphon lizard riding soldiers, they just simply have to be on the control marker itself. The entire model doesn't have to be on the control marker, just a portion of it. So a lot of times in games you'll see people are conservative and they'll sort of put their models back, on the edge of it. Other times you'll see that they're fully on top of the marker itself. In Age of Sigmar, you can actually be on the center of this control marker when you're playing 40K. And I'll just go ahead and pop this over to the side. If you do have models, they cannot actually be on top of the control marker itself, so they can't end their move on the center of the control marker. So they just have to simply be around the periphery of that control marker. So those are a couple different subtleties when it comes to understanding just the overall size of the control marker, and then also to sort of the zone of influence. Next is going to be a frequently asked question that I hear quite a bit from new Age of Sigmar players. If they started with a Spearhead and then they're going to move on to a larger 1,000 or 2,000 point game. So what I have on the screen is the traditional Age of Sigmar Spearhead setup. And please notice that I have an objective control marker simply here. And these are actually part of the Spearhead set. When you purchase it, you get these predefined maps. So what I'm going to do is take now a control marker from Age of Sigmar itself. This is going to be the official specifications for playing an Age of Sigmar game, like 1,000, 2,000 point game. And please notice that the one in the top right corner of the screen, that's going to be a Spearhead objective control marker. Please notice that these are actually different. Something that I've seen in some players when they try to transfer from Spearhead over into a Age of Sigmar sort of normal style game, a 1,000 or 2,000 point game, what they do is they go online and then they try to purchase objective control markers. And what they do is they just simply go to their Spearhead set and they measure it. And then this is actually going to be wrong because it's going to be smaller than what you actually need. So please notice that there's an overall sort of size difference. So when you look at the one in Spearhead, radially going outward, it's about 2.5 inches. So you're losing basically ½ inch on each side, sort of radially. So on the diameter, it's going to be off by a full inch, which is kind of bad. So just make sure that when you're making your purchases that you look for the correct size, and you always keep in mind that there's that 40 millimeter center and then 3 inches radially coming outward from the edge of that marker. So next up, why do I even care about objective control markers in Age of Sigmar and 40K? And the answer is pretty simple. It's going to help you score victory points. So the player with the highest number of victory points at the end of the game is going to actually win that game. So as an example, on the left-hand side of the screen, I have the Seraphon army, and I have my Lancers, and they're sitting on this objective control marker. They're going to have control of that marker if they have the highest amount of control units actually on it. So as an example, I'm going to zoom in on their stats card. And what I'm going to show you is that there's this control value and it says 2. That's going to be 2 per model. So we're going to go back and take a quick look at what that means. Please notice that I have 3 of these Lancers actually on this objective marker. So all I'm going to do is give 2 points per each model that's actually on this marker. And so thus the Lizard Warriors are going to have a control value of 6. If they have the highest amount of control sitting on that objective marker, this faction is going to take control of that marker and thus will be able to score victory points moving forward. And during the scoring phase for Age of Sigmar, they will be able to get some of those victory points. As a further example for Age of Sigmar, I'm going to throw an additional model into the mix. On the right-hand side of the screen is a demon known as the Great Unclean One. As I go ahead and zoom in on the stats for the Great Unclean One, you're going to notice that it has a control score of 5. So this demon is now resting the edge of its base on this objective marker itself. So what that means is it's going to add its control value of 5 when you're trying to see who actually has authority and control over this objective marker. So as we saw in the previous video clip, we have 6 Lancers here. So what that means is that, or rather we have 3 Lancers with a control value of 2. So thus we have 6 for this army and we have 5 for this army. So in this case right here, the Seraphon Lizard Army would have control of this marker. Now, as this battle goes on between these Lizard Warriors and this demon on the right-hand side of the screen, control of that objective marker could shift. As an example, maybe the Great Unclean One attacks and kills one of these models. Now, when we go back and look at the objective control value, we're going to simply say each of the lizards has a 2. So that means that they have a score of 4. Now on the right-hand side of the screen, we know that our Great Unclean One has a control value of 5. So in this case, the 5 is going to beat the 4, and the Great Unclean One, this demonic model, is going to take control of this objective marker. And this battle will obviously bounce back and forth. And what you can have happen is additional armies and units from each side can actually come in and try to take this marker itself. So just understand it's going to be the overall control value for that army itself. And so you can have a lot of interesting dynamics occur in which these different models are fighting over this objective marker. There's a subtle rule in Age of Sigmar that I'm just going to go over very quickly. If this army takes control of this objective marker, it can leave the objective marker itself, and the Lizard Army still has control over this objective marker until an enemy takes it from them. Sometimes you hear the term sticky objectives when you're talking about Warhammer in general, and this is kind of what it means. What that means is that once you take control of an objective marker, you can actually move your armies off it. So in Age of Sigmar, the Lizards will have control over this until some other force, such as the Great Unclean One, moves in and takes that control marker from them. So that's a little bit of a subtlety that exists in Age of Sigmar, and there's a little bit of a rule difference between Age of Sigmar and 40K. For this next example, I'm going to use this measuring device. It's exactly 3 inches to kind of help us understand what's happening in the 40K example. In the center of the map, right here, I have a Warhammer 40K objective marker. So what we know is that radially we have to be within 3 inches of the edge of this objective marker to take control of it. As an example, our Great Unclean One will move onto the table, and it's going to be within the 3 inches, and I can see this because its base is within 3 inches of this control marker. On the other side, we can have some additional enemy models moving in, and these are also going to be within that radius. So they're going to be actively trying to take control of this objective marker. Now, this is kind of the same thing in 40K. You want to put your models within the sort of effective radius of this objective marker in order to take control of it. Now, in 40K, you're going to have slightly different terminology. So I'm going to go ahead and just put this onto the screen. Whereas we looked at the Great Unclean One previously in the Age of Sigmar arena, now we're going to look at the card and we're going to find some different information on it. Notice that this is going to be labeled as OC and there's a 5 underneath of it. This is going to be the model's objective control value. And it's very similar to what we saw in Age of Sigmar, except they just called it a control value. So what that means is that the Great Unclean One is going to exert that 5 points onto here, and then you're going to compare it against the Tau army that is also trying to take control of this marker. Now, 40K has a little bit of a different subtlety. So as an example, if, let's say, the Great Unclean One isn't here, and the Tau army is right here, and they ever move outside of that effective 3 inches, so thus you can see that nothing radially is within 3 inches of that objective control marker, the Tau player no longer controls this marker. So in 40K, you have to actively be controlling these objective markers by placing your armies and your units around sort of this sphere of influence within that 3-inch radius that emanates from this control marker. So just understand that it's going to be a subtle difference between these two games. In 40K, you do have different armies that have that sort of sticky objective style of control where they can basically tag this objective marker by moving into its control radius one time, and then they can move away, and that player has control over that until an enemy unit comes in and takes it actually from them. For another quick rules clarification, there are some armies and some units in both games of Warhammer that have 0 objective control values. And I know that sounds a little bit strange, so just be on the lookout for it. So the first example is going to be on the left-hand side of the screen, and you have what's called manifestations in the Age of Sigmar game. So as an example, we have the Purple Sun. And kind of what is really surprising when you play this game is that you have this really massive miniature that comes out onto the battlefield. So when this thing pops out, it's pretty large and it's pretty imposing when it pops out onto the battlefield. So like naturally you would think, hey, that thing can take control of objective markers and it's going to exert some influence over the game. And the fact of the matter is manifestations have a control value of 0. They can't actually take control of objective markers. So that's a little bit strange, and I think when people kind of transition from Spearhead into Age of Sigmar, they get a little bit surprised by that. So when you play Spearhead, you don't have anything like manifestations or even really spells or magic in the game. So when you transition over, just understand that this really awesome model has a control value of 0. And then as a further extension of this idea, I have a 40K data card. I'm going to zoom in, and this is for some Nurglings. And if you notice, the OC value on this unit is a 0. So it doesn't matter how many of these Nurglings you have actually out on the table. If they're sitting on objective control markers, they don't contribute anything to that. So thus you can't actually take control of it. So as a quick summary, there are units in both games of Warhammer that cannot take control of objective markers. All right, so to bring everything together, these objective markers are used for various players to score victory points in both of these Warhammer games. On the left-hand side, I have sort of an Age of Sigmar example. On the right-hand side of the screen, I have the 40K objective marker example. In general, and this is just my preference, I prefer using a full-size objective marker I think it makes the game go a little bit easier instead of constantly trying to have to measure the 3 inches from the objective marker, the 40 millimeter one, on the right hand side of the screen. Now, there are some advantages to using these small ones. They're easy to transport, so you can just go ahead and throw them in a little bit of a bag or throw them in your dice bag when you're playing one of these matches, so you can transport those a little bit easier. These I just like better because it's easy. You can put actually parts of the train that overlap it, and then you can just move around. Also, something that's nice about these objective markers, specifically the Age of Sigmar ones, and this is kind of hard to see, but they have almost like a textured backing, so it makes it less likely for it to kind of like slide around on the battlefield. This one, obviously, there's no real texture on this, so it slides around pretty easy, and it's easy for it to sort of get moved over the course of the game. And you know, you're putting models simply around it. So whatever style appeals to you, that's what I recommend you go ahead and do. What's nice about the current sort of state of Warhammer is that you can get these objective markers, whether you're playing Age of Sigmar or 40K. So that's kind of nice, especially the ones for Age of Sigmar. I really like these. I think this is a great addition to the game in the current sort of 2025 environment. So I want to thank everybody for joining me today, and as always, have fun gaming, and I'll be making some more of these Warhammer videos in the future.